I think it's important to just have a really, open conversation and exchange of ideas, because I'm very aware, and this is also why I call this possible environment, that there is no clear definition. And I'm also very aware that there's a bit of a, confusion of what is actually an environment, or what are environments, and ecology and landscape. And, so all these things that are sort of floating around. And I don't have an answer for that, so I should put that disclaimer in right away. But I actually, in the contrary, I think I'm just offering a couple of ways of seeing it and looking at it, and then we'll take it from there.
That's beautifully put, because, it's meant also, as kind of Jackie Bloom suggested, who is now the thesis coordinator, that it's really meant to be a provocations workshop.
Yeah.
So in many sense, it's not a lot of answers to the questions that we have, but in fact, there are provocations to the students to consider and to begin to kind of formulate their own opinions and their own positions. And so with that, I'd love to introduce you just very briefly to our audience so that everybody knows. It's actually interesting to hear that Elena and Karen, you haven't met in person. I've known Karen for over 10 years. We met quite some time ago. And she combines, I'll kind of read the professional text, but I'll intertwine a little bit of a kind of personal. Karen Lohrmann combines her background in art and architecture with writing, teaching, editorial, and curatorial projects. She's co-founder of SDN-KLM, and this is the collaboration with Stefano De Martino. She's editor and producer at the Art Edition Correspondence and initiator of the multimedia testing grounds, Bay of Mars. She's currently the Design of Cities faculty at SCI-Arc. So some of you might actually see her in the hallways, so say hi. And she's also the program coordinator at the Now Institute. Now, in your provocation, what was kind of amazing is that you bring up so many distinct figures in environment, from Bruno Latour, Martin Guinard, and Eva Lynn, to Lacton Vassal, to Pierre Huyghe. And these are people who are working across different fields: history of technology, theory of environment, architecture, and art. And so I myself am super excited to have you here and very much looking forward to this morning's discussion. With that, give you the mic, Karen. Welcome to all the students.
Yeah, welcome to everybody here. So I really look forward to this morning, and it's been really beautiful to have this challenge. It's actually also a provocation for me, because I keep saying a lot of things, and then all of a sudden Jackie came up and said, "Okay, you know what? Can you just talk about this? So can you make a provocation out of your own provocation?" That is pretty much how I felt. And so let's have a look at this, and let me quickly figure out how to share my screen here. So this is going to take me a little moment, and then we should be good. Just as. Okay. Well, so what you're seeing now is nothing new to you, I'm pretty sure. I think I need to start. That is sort of, to take a deep breath, because there's a lot coming. To start, let's just consider air for a moment. This is the work that I did together with Stefano, as Anna said, my sort of partner in many crimes. It's actually just looking at air and looking at the horizon over many, many years. The horizon and the sea. I grew up in a very flat place. So for me, the horizon was always that line, a clear, simple line. And then people in the mountains, they were all of a sudden saying to me, "Oh, but the horizon is the line where the mountain meets the sky." And I was like, that can't be, it's where the sea meets the sky. So I just had never thought about it. And then I realized, okay, it's just about that thing, to look at air, to look at the differentiation of what we probably consider Earth and that part above, which is maybe the atmosphere, maybe the universe, maybe a lot of other things. So this work, air, is the overlap of a lot of photos that we took at the sea, looking at the sea in different weathers and different climatic conditions and smog conditions, clear skies, all kinds of things, big zooms and things like that. And we just tried to meet all of these photographs always at the horizon line. And this is why you're seeing this changing that is happening. It's also to say that, many people say, oh, well, this whole thing about the air and pollution, we can't see it. And so it's always been used as an excuse that we can't do anything about bad air because we cannot see it. But I'm not so sure, because I do think here we are seeing that the air is changing, that it has different colors, that it is being illuminated by different light, but it's also the way the light meets the particles in the air and the, sort of times and whatever is just happening in the air. So I think we do not have that excuse that what we are doing to the air is not visible. Air is very visible. Now, this piece here is going on for some minutes, but I'm just using it to tell you a little bit more. In my text to you, I wrote, imagine yourself in the twilight, instances of flux and entropy, uncertainty, imminence, virtuality, urgency, sort of momentary concerns. This is not to scare or to create anxieties. On the contrary, for me, it's been my own provocation. And now for the next hours, it's also your provocation. So it's something that it's just really exciting to look at if you join these works and people that I will introduce to you. It's something that, for me, these works that I will show to you are works that I've come across mostly in exhibitions over the years, sometimes in publications, sometimes online, in conversations, and so on. And they stuck with me, and they've definitely also influenced my work and my thinking. And most of all, they've actually given me hope and optimism, to just think, there's so many ways of engaging with, the times that we are in right now, this environmental uncertainty and the challenge that we have in these conversations and so on. So it's maybe a provocation, but it's also pretty fantastic. Okay, most of it all, to me, the environment is about coexistence, because everything in the environment is connected, and it is not about boundaries or borders or nation states, all these things that make it completely complicated at this time to actually get somewhere, to get to agreements and so on. The environment and coexistence is not something that we agree on. It's something that simply is there, and it's all connected. So air and sound and water, they don't know boundaries. They just do what they do. They flow and they change and expand and so on. So these elements are pretty much an X-ray of all life that we know. And this image that I'm showing you here is something that I've seen a few days ago, and I'm still not quite clear what this is. I've called it an ambience trouvé, like the object trouvé, which is, there was this reflection in the sky, but that was not the sun. The sun was somewhere else. The sun was somewhere out of the image. And so somehow the sun must have gone through the clouds, hit something on planet Earth, that then reflected it back into the clouds. And that caused this beautiful little effect for a couple of minutes. And I was just looking out of the window. Then I opened the window and it was still there. I thought, okay, So this is, something happening that I don't know, and it obviously was not intended, and it's just there. Something that is connected to something and something else and so on. So it's coexistence. Let's get into this a little bit. One work that has been incredibly important to me is a work by Ettore Sozzas, Italian or Austrian-Italian, whatever, Milan-based designer. For me, he's Milan-based. I guess you agree, I don't know. So Sozzas in 1972, he was actually the lead designer for Olivetti, beautiful company, made these epic typewriters. If you still know what a typewriter is, that thing before the computer to make text. He was an epic designer anyway, so funny and going through so many different parts throughout his life. He had to take a break in the early 70s because it was all getting too much. He had to get out of the city. And in that period, he went south and produced a series of mostly images, but images from installations that he made in the landscape. He called them metaphors. This particular image here is called Design of a Floor on Which Your Steps Will Be Uncertain. And I think the title says it all. It is something that at that time, and still today, 50 years on, is something that we just simply have to accept. There are certain things that will always be uncertain. And it's just okay with it as long as we sort of are honest and realistic with things. So this is a photography in which he drew and then re-photographed it. And so it's just a beautiful image. But I'm mostly actually attracted to the title. So what I'm trying to say here right at the beginning, titles are extremely important. Another thing that struck me was this quote that I came across. That was probably around 10 years ago. Landscape is the image of the whole, the world, and what happens in it. First, I was confused. Bart Verschaffel is a Belgian theorist and philosopher. He's writing about landscape painting. He's writing about a lot of things, but often really in the context of a notion of landscape. So there's some really beautiful essays, actually. We've always been, we are using this word landscape a lot for many, many things. That is what I think is confusing a lot of people. Some people think landscape is green. But I do think I can agree with this quote. The more I thought about this, I really thought, okay, this is really giving me something, the image of the whole. So everything that you look at is landscape. And so that changes also. It is the world and what happens in it. So it actually gives us the opportunity to see landscape and with it, the environment and ecology, because these are all terms that we cannot really define so clearly, as something that is happening and that is changing and that is fluctuating. And I think that's really important. So landscape is not only what happens on ground, but it is, well, as you can guess, it's also what is happening, above ground, as we've just seen previously in air. Excuse me, and it is about public smog, amongst other things. Amy Balkin's work, which I briefly described also in the text for you. Let's take a quick detour here to another work of hers, which is of course connected, which is this poster, a multiple, which one can pick up in various museums when they're open. And also download on the internet. A sort of brief introduction into the atmosphere, where she, it depends now on how big your screens are, whether you can read this or not, but it is, it's actually what is beautiful is that this is an explanation of these various spheres that make it into the atmosphere, the exosphere, the thermosphere, the thermopause, the mesopause, the stratopause, the tropopause, the exobase, and so on, mesosphere, stratopause and stratosphere, and so on. So you can learn a lot from this poster, and just to understand actually what is going on out there, and why and how does it influence what is going on our planet Earth. So you can see from the images, it all relates to things that are happening mostly on Earth, but also our communication tools and results and reactions to the atmosphere. So it's a back and forth pretty much. Coming to public smog is a part in the atmosphere that fluctuates in location and scale. So what does that mean? This park is constructed through financial or legal or political activities, meaning that companies can buy or sell off or trade off carbon and pollution and all these kind of things that they emit into the atmosphere. And by that, the atmosphere above a place is being sort of cleared of this polluting air. And for some time, it can then be declared a park, sort of a public park of fresh air above a place. So, for example, in the fall 2006, there was an opening of the so-called upper park above the UK, and then later also above the entire EU. But this is not something that happens once and for all. It depends also on airflow and things like that. And of course, this is a symbolic project. It is not something that is real, because unfortunately, that would be great. But it is something that has sort of risen a lot of awareness and therefore also created quite a lot of conversation, discussion. The biggest discussion was probably coming as a response to Amy Balkin's exhibition at the Documenta in Kassel in 2012, I think it was. So here to the left, we're seeing her installation actually in the museum in Kassel, where she was showing her research into the atmosphere and so on. And it was combined with also the campaign of sending postcards to your own government. So there were a lot of people coming to this exhibition. It's an exhibition that only happens every 5 years. It's a huge event, bringing people from all over the world pretty much to that little town in Germany. And the exhibition is taking place in the entire city. People picked up these postcards saying that they were pleading for the atmosphere, this abstract thing, to become a World Heritage, a UNESCO World Heritage, to be registered as a World Heritage. This is something that usually happens to places like cities, or to landscapes like national parks like Yosemite here in the United States, for example, ancient cities and stuff like that. So the atmosphere, this thing that we cannot grasp, was, according to Amy Balkin, something that should really be registered as a World Heritage, because it is something that we all own and that is our common good. So about 50,000 postcards were sent to the respective governments. So internationally, people were just sending this to their governments, pleading for their governments to actually support this action. It was a very symbolic act. It has not happened. So the atmosphere is still not registered as a World Heritage, but it has raised a lot of awareness. And I think this is what is important. Amy Balkin, in her work, is always between the museum and actually the space outside. So another way of promoting this project was this thing of putting billboards up across the globe. This is somewhere in Africa. I actually don't know exactly where it is, but he's been just putting up billboards everywhere to just raise awareness for the title public smog, which is something that makes you think, what is that public smog? Yeah, I mean, it's not individual smog, it's public, and we're all contributing to it, to our actions and so on. And I think it's kind of interesting to see on what different levels she is working to show, her work and which media she's using between the museum and the open space. Also working on air, amongst many other things, but always in connection with air, is Thomas Saracino. And this is now something that I didn't mention in my text. Otherwise, that text would have been very long eventually. Thomas Saracino, Argentinian artist who's based, I think, in Berlin these days, he has been looking at the environment in extremely beautiful ways. And he's fascinated with spiders. He's been observing the incredible work of spiders to create their living spheres for many years. And he is respecting spiders, especially because they have been around longer than any living species on this planet. Yeah. So we should actually look at spiders and respect them for that. They know how to navigate the planet. They know how to navigate, urgencies, weather, all kinds of things. Even when we just destroy a cobweb, they just build another one. Yeah, and they in their building, in their planning and designing of these webs, they respond to light. They respond to humidity, wind, and so on. So this is why, because they are working with the elements, this is why they have survived for such a long time. And I think what Saracino is saying here is also that we can learn from them and that we should actually really pay attention to them instead of just destroying their spheres. So spiderwebs, cobwebs have inspired a lot of his work. Again, let me hint at the title of this work. I mean, as I said earlier, giving your work a title, if it's only a working title, it can be changed and so on. It's something really amazing. This one is called Galaxies Forming Along Filaments Like Droplets Along the Strands of a Spider's Web. This tells the whole story, yeah. And then going on a few years later, this same attitude has actually then inspired Saracino also to develop whole spatial installations. He's always going back between, what he finds as the spider's web, and then also translating that. He has a background in architecture and natural sciences and engineering and art. So he brings all these things together. It's a classic, beautiful example of coexistence of professions also. So here, these are the beginnings of this series of many installations called Cloud Cities. Again, things that change. And when you see these strings in the space here, these are elastics. So the moment you walk into the space, you're told to not touch these elastics. But of course, you can't do that. You have to actually touch them because otherwise you wouldn't be able to move around. So everything starts moving. And that's a really beautiful thing. And it is actually also somehow, an image for what is going on in our daily lives. Yeah, we touch something and we connect to it, and then we touch somewhere else and connect to that. Yeah, and that is how the environment or environments in general also form. Another work by Thomas Saracino, but it's always sort of based on this flow of air and so on, is The Poetic Cosmos of the Breath, also a beautiful title, which consists of these very, very lightweight membranes that are following airflows and cold and warm flows. Yeah? So when cold air and warm air meet, then, as we most likely know from weather, that sort of creates some wind or some draft or something like that. And this very, very lightweight material reacts to it. Yeah. So of course he's manipulating this, but as you can see, it is creating this beautiful dome and an amazing ambience. Imagine the sound. If you want to look more into these works, of course you can find endless beautiful stuff on the internet. So that brings us to another project, another one of these seminal epic exhibitions that have sort of, fed me over the years. The House of World Cultures in Berlin, HKW, as we usually call it, in 2012 started the Anthropocene project. And that was pretty much a time when we started waking up or opening up to this topic of the Anthropocene and what this could be. At the time, there were still a lot of scientists actually sitting together trying to define when the Anthropocene has started, or what it actually exactly means, and all of that. And then later, I think it was 2016, this group of scientists made a couple of declarations to frame this new epoch or new era that we're apparently now living in. I know we are all getting a little bit tired of this conversation. And so I think this Anthropocene project at the time, which still runs with various projects, so it's about 10 years into it now, it sort of helps you understand a couple of basics. And that is how I used this exhibition, to which I've been going back and forth over the years, because there was always something new happening. They pretty much took the whole house and put it under the topic of the Anthropocene project and all these scientific outcomes and conversations. And it is not only about weather or climate, as we might probably think, but it is also about what are we eating in the Anthropocene? What sounds are there? How do we visualize land and things like that? So this thick catalog or set of books here, Grain, Vapor, and Ray, is bringing this all very nicely together. If you ever can get across something like that in a library, maybe have a look at it. It's also really beautiful because all of a sudden you realize that grain, vapor, and rain, they're meteorological climate terms, but they're also more than that. So this is already, where you start looking something up and you're like, okay, what is this exactly? Vapor, ray, and so it's just a challenge, or we can say a provocation. As part of the Anthropocene project, I, for example, came across the Anthropogenic River, the Mississippi. This is a drawing from 1944 from a guy called Harold N. Fisk. He was working for the Army Corps of Engineers in the United States, and the drawing is called Meandering Mississippi. So you look at that and you're like, okay, well, I knew that the Mississippi is a very curvy river and that it has been straightened out for transportation reasons, mainly because ships have gotten bigger and bigger and they wanted to get to places faster and faster and so on. But what this drawing is also showing is the natural flow of this river, that when there is more water, it just spreads out and it changes with the seasons. It's moving around. It's using a whole entire territory. So it's not just some water that is flowing like a spaghetti or something, but it is actually a whole area that can be also dry. So it's a river is more than just water. A river is actually a whole territory of overflow basins and wetlands and all of that. We tend to forget that because we are looking at rivers often nowadays that have been controlled, and just look at the Los Angeles River, that they're sort of, formed and shaped into a certain trajectory or something like that. So I think this drawing here is actually powerful. Another visualization is, of course, the anthropogenic sound, which is something we can't see. Sound is something we hear. And still, since quite some time, this is just a random Google search, there is a lot of, white noise, and trying to understand what this is and developing pieces that then, help us mitigate white noise and so on. So this is actually the invisible made visible. Camille Enrault, in 2014 was a fellow at the Smithsonian in Washington, and she created Grosse Fatigue. The Smithsonian is a beautiful museum, we know that. And she was a fellow in the anthropological department. So this is about the relationship of humankind with the surroundings and environments and so on. And she just went through the archives of the Smithsonian and created this video, which then also won the Golden Lion in Venice at the Venice Biennale, which is sort of a collection of, here's a picture from the archives. It's a collection of, this relationship between humankind and other species, plants, animals, bacteria, elements, and so on. So in this video, which she just said, was the easiest way to make some sense of what she was finding in these archives, she's just overlapping this super complexity of, exactly, again, the coexistence of all these things that create our planet and also the universe. Grosse Fatigue means great exhaustion in English. So it adds to what also this whole Anthropocene debate is in a way. It can be exhausting, it can be overwhelming, but what we are seeing here is that people are finding ways to visualize these things and to make them visible. And I think that's the first step to, help us talk about environments and to understand what we can do and what environments are doing to us, and to sort of find a way of living together. Now, the 3 Taipei biennials that I was mentioning in my text, 2014, Nicolas Bourriot was the curator of the Great Acceleration. And at the time, he was writing that the Great Acceleration seeks to renegotiate our relationship with both technosphere and biosphere. All right. Then 4 years later, Mali Wu and Francesco Manacorda curated the Biennale again in Taipei, Post-Nature, a museum as an ecosystem. Impressive. And then 2 years later, Bruno Latour, Martin Guina, and Eva Lin do another Taipei Biennale, and they call it You and I Don't Live on the Same Planet. Again, we are having 3 very strong titles here. I do think that this last one, You and I Don't Live on the Same Planet, that is sort of taking us a bit into a next direction. It's very recent, and it is a provocation also, because it's sort of saying, hey, you know what? If you think you want to not think about environmental urgencies, planetary difficulties, environmental concerns, and so on, then you are living on another planet. It doesn't mean really another planet, but it means, the planet that you want to live on is very different from the reality. And I think that is somehow maybe a step where something has happened also over the past years that made this urgency more urgent. And this made me wonder, because I've been following these biennials over the years and tried to learn as much as possible about them and got their catalogs and so on. I was wondering, why is this happening in Taiwan? And this is amazing. It's just one place that is so much pushing this, and there's such complex exhibitions. It's so inspiring. And then I came across, obviously, something else, which is this beautiful example by Philippe Rahm and Mosbach Paysagistes and so on at the Jade Eco Park in Taichung, also in Taiwan, which is the territory of an old airport that's inactive now. And so it was made into an ecological park that was supposed to actually really work with climate, with the sometimes incredibly heavy summers that are very humid, the tropical rains and very hot, a lot of mosquitoes and stuff like that. So the whole question was, how can this park actually show in an urban context that climate can be changed through open space, and what is needed? So together with plants, as we know that plants can cool down air, they absorb pollution and so on and so on. Now Philippe Rahm and Mosbach landscapers, they were also really looking into the various zones of this park, and you can see here that there are the pink zones and the blue zones. The pink zones are the atmosphere sort of filters and attractors, and the blue zones are cooling and shades. So pink is sort of filtering the hot air and is also actually attracting mosquitoes, so that people can sort of be in places where the mosquitoes don't come. So these are these sensors that you might know. And the blue parts are cooling and shading. So there are all these amazing elements scattered around, and we're not going to look into these things too much now, but I wanted to show you how exquisite and beautiful also these drawings are. So these devices are called ozone eclipse and strato clouds. And, so again, we have amazing titles coming up here. And they are somehow very technological, but also really based in the technological aspect, totally based on nature, on just learning from nature, filtering, and so on. So this, for example, is this ozone eclipse. And you can sit on a bench under it, and it's cooler under it because it sort of pulls out the humidity out of the air and then transforms it and blows sort of a cooling air down. But this is something that is all, not based on some nuclear power station, but on the energy that is generated in this park. Then these are the stratoclouds that are sort of absorbing the humidity again, and then also at a certain time blowing it back into the nature so that the trees can do their job of cleaning the air. They're also really beautiful pieces. This is the visitors center, which is also a place where you can learn a lot about the technology that is being applied. And here we are seeing a roof full of solar cells that is also obviously providing shade. So you can see that everything in this park is doing something, giving something has more than one function and is there for a reason, and always also in the right place, because I've studied the areas, the zones very carefully where things could be happening and should be installed, so that they're working with airflows and daytimes and things like that. So that brings us to this topic of, all of a sudden we end up in the fashion industry, but we're still in, coexistence. Marine Serre, a young fashion designer in France, is adding the issue of regeneration, of actually using things again and again, which is what we just had also in the Jade Eco Park in Taichung. And in her collections, she is not only producing her clothes out of already used fabrics. That is one thing, that is the regeneration. But she's also creating awareness, trying to influence the minds of her fans, of her buyers, and so on, by actually staging very, very environmentally conscious fashion shows. This one is, as you can see, in the outdoors, and it was sometime in the fall on a rainy day. The Marée Noire means the Black Sea. So it's referring to oil spills, dirty waters, contaminated waters, and so on. And you can see that, first of all, the visitors of this fashion show is kind of unusual. They are sitting here under umbrellas in the rain, and they all wear decent shoes, which usually when you look at fashion shows, everybody's sitting there with their fancy clothes, but this time this couldn't happen. And the models themselves are obviously wearing more emergency wear, of course, with a sort of fashion hint and some sort of humor to it, but they are trying to protect themselves to this environmental disaster that they are obviously facing in this show. There's also a video that comes with this collection, and I should say that Marine Serre, in all of her collections, but she's only really actually showing since about 4 or 5 years, she's always referring to environmental issues, issues of humankind, equity, multiple species, and so on and so on. So this is the video that comes with this one collection, Marée Noire, which shows these models destroying a water pipeline that goes through a pretty desert, dry landscape. And when the water then comes out, as you can probably see or guess here, there's this water leaking out, it then spurs these animated flowers. So it's a real video, but I mean, it's sort of the half animated and half realistic video, and it's actually quite funny. So you can find it on her website. Now, the topic of the regeneration, in some way, I mean, she's quite clear about this, comes back in her boutiques, where she then brings these materials that have previously been used in the video setting, and she brings them back into the interiors of her boutiques, and to install the clothes that are made from recycled fabrics. So there's a whole regeneration process, and I think I wanted to show this, to take this excursion into the fashion industry, also because I think we now, in the various professions and fields, really have to look at how each field can best reach the masses, everyone, in different ways, so that we really do start engaging and thinking about what an environment really is. So that's this issue of coexistence, that we all really try to really look at things from different perspectives. It's just, what I believe in, the interdisciplinarity is something incredibly beautiful. And coming to interdisciplinarity, or going on with this, we definitely have to look at Pierre Week's work. This one, Exomine Deep Water, is actually, the title first came up in 2017, but I'm saying it started in 2012 at least, because he is combining different works into ongoing installations. With every new exhibition that he assembles, he adds something to it. This female body, this bronze here, holds a beehive as its head. This beehive, I saw it first in 2012 in an exhibition, but then the figure was still a concrete body, and now it is a bronze. This is a picture from more recent, I think from 2018 or something. So that already has evolved. And now the bronze is also showing this figure in a different position. Then what else we have here, which is probably not so obvious, but when you think of the description of all the elements in this exhibition, you might not be able to read this. Okay, so I'll give it to you. The figure is accompanied by plants. There's an orange tree and a plum tree. I think the plum tree is this one that is just starting to flower. Then there are diverse animals, calico cat, we don't see that, ants, too small, spiders, butterflies, axolotl, and there's a pond here in the back with water lilies, which we are also not seeing. But so there's a lot we don't see. But this is just the whole description of this project. Yeah, so all these things that are adding to this installation. The water lilies are coming. They've also been an earlier work already, and they've been evolving over time. The water lilies are based on Claude Monet's, the expressionist painter, Claude Monet's Nymphaeas, the water lilies. He made some 250 paintings of water lilies. And that was pretty much his life. So Claude Monet, he had a garden outside Paris. And in that garden, over the time of his life, he created more and more ponds, and he loved water lilies. So he planted water lilies and he started painting them. And that was his work. So this is this one painting out of 250. Pierre Week, when he heard about this story, he actually went to this garden and looked at these ponds, and they've been a little bit abandoned ever since. So we're talking 100 years later. And he looked at these ponds and he wanted to understand this sort of system, the bacterial system, the biotope that is in these ponds. And he took some water samples and went to a laboratory and said, can you create this again? And so what we are seeing here in these water tanks in an exhibition, I think this one is an exhibition in London. I'm not sure, these water tanks have been shown worldwide. I think actually even also here at LAGMA. So these water tanks are actually showing replicas of Claude Monet's ponds, and they're murky. They are not the typical aquarium, even though they have fish. They sort of, they're just what they are. Yeah, so they're a biotope, and they are the replica of a real existing pond in the outskirts of Paris. And so that is 100 years on. Pierre Week's response to Claude Monet's paintings. In a way, also a way of regeneration and looking at things from another perspective. And I think that's very inspiring, that you try to understand a certain context in which something has been created, and then you look at it through fresh eyes. Another work, also in this whole series of Pierre Weeks, as I said, he's always adding and using things from earlier works and so on, is After a Life Ahead, which is an ice rink. Originally, this building was an ice rink and it wasn't used anymore. It was abandoned. And he fell in love with that building and sort of created this new place. Yeah, so he opened up the ceilings with these huge holes that open up automatically, that the water would come in, and then he broke open the ground, and he added a lot of things again to this sort of biotope. So you can read maybe on the bottom, there are there's first of all the ice rink that originally had a concrete floor, but then that is taken out. So it shows all of a sudden sand and clay and phreatic water, and then bacteria, algae, bee, chimera, peacock. These are all, sort of the species that Pierre Week brings in. Then at some point, there's also an aquarium, a black switchable glass, conus textile, an incubator, human cancer cells, genetic algorithm, augmented reality, automated ceiling structure, rain, ammoniac, and a logic game. So that is everything out of which this whole thing is being composed. Yeah. So that is really the creation of this ensemble of experiences that you can have when you walk into this ice rink. And what does that mean? I mean, this is again that he's creating this coexistence of some natural elements and some artificial elements, if we want to talk about natural and artificial, but I think it's just, he's creating a biotope. And that is what makes this whole thing incredibly interesting. It is a bit of an eerie regeneration, but it is also something that is incredibly curious. And it's been really fun to walk around in that thing. Now that brings us to La Quatorze Vassal, which I mentioned also in my text. And maybe a little bit surprising that all of a sudden, he is this kind of architecture. But it is exactly not just that, because again, regeneration goes on and coexistence go on, because La Quatorze is working mostly with what already exists, and they do that since a long time. One of the very, very first projects is this house in Cap Ferret in France, which was built on a lot of land just by the sea. So the sea is right here, and it's surrounded by a pine grove. When we look at the plan, you see these circles here are actually some of these big, big pine trees. And they didn't want to cut any of these trees, and they most likely were also not allowed to. And it didn't make sense, because pine trees, you might know, have incredibly strong roots, and they root out horizontally. And so the whole ground, I mean, you couldn't put any foundation into this ground, which was the reason why they lifted up the house and just built it around the pine trees. What you're seeing here is, trees growing through the house, but the house really respecting these trees. So there's a sort of inside outside. It's not quite clear where the inside and where the outside is. And I think that is actually really inspiring about this early work of La Quatorze Vassal. They then went on. I mean, they have done, as you know, they just recently won the Pritzker Prize. They've done a lot of projects. But another one that I find extremely important is their non-renovation of the Palais de Tokyo, which is the Museum for Contemporary Art in Paris. They were commissioned to do that in 2001, and they started gutting the huge building. I mean, let's go back here. So we're seeing the outdoors here. The outdoors, it's a 1920s building. It was ex-Japanese embassy, and then the Japanese embassy at some point moved somewhere else. So this is a building that is, it's a concrete structure, and it is clad in natural stone. So you're seeing here, there are all these sort of funny sculptural things and this natural stone cladding. Nothing has really been done to the outdoors, to the outside of the building. Inside, here in this curved part, you can see everything has been gutted. And that's pretty much when all of a sudden the budget was stopped. So they had been approved a budget to do the renovation work, but then they realized, upon gutting the building, there were a lot of problems. This is a classic. And everything became a lot more expensive, but there was no money to do it. So the works were pretty much stopped, and they had very little money left to do what they could do. And they focused only on the upgrade of accessibility in the building. So they put in elevators, staircases, some security railings so that people would be safe, so that this building could actually be transformed into a public space. And then some 10, 15 years later, they were given more budget to complete the works, but most people, this is really the most favorite museum of Parisians. And it's always full. It's really beautiful. People go there just to meet other people. So many people said, well, no, don't do anything more. Yeah, just leave it the way it is. Yeah. So they just completed a couple of works in 2012-14, sort of, a restaurant and so on, a little bit more. But they left it the way it is. And so now you just walk into this building and have this beautiful carcass that you can experience and appreciate. It's a little bit like a huge SCI-Arc, and it has a couple of really funny spaces inside. The other project, which is really crucial in the oeuvre of Lacaton Vassal, which I also would call a project of regeneration, is these 530 apartments in Bordeaux. No, they didn't build them. They just changed them. You can see here this periphery, this kind of, no, it's not the periphery. Well, I don't exactly know where in Bordeaux this is actually, but you are seeing all these apartment buildings here, yeah? So this is how they usually looked. Something like a very normal facade, small typical windows. And these buildings here are the ones that Lacaton Vassal transformed. What they did is they didn't change the facade. They put a new space in front of the facade. They added some 3 meters, 10 feet in front of the building and gave people actually more space. And what is so remarkable about this is actually that, here you can see this, that, people just for nothing got a bigger apartment. The other thing that is so remarkable and that is so beautiful also about the story is that everybody who lived in these buildings is still living in the building. So this is not an act of gentrification or something, but everybody who previously lived here is still living here. They were just, when the transformation was coming to their floor, they were moved into another apartment, but then they moved back in. When they moved back in, they found themselves with additional space, and everybody sort of did something else with it. So when you look at Lacaton's website, Lacaton Vassal's website, you find endless photos of how people are living in this building. It's actually really, really beautiful. This is what they did along the entire facade of these buildings. They just added this piece here, and I'm seeing it. It's 1 meter, 3 feet of balcony space outdoor, and then we have 2.8 meters, which is about 9 feet. Of sort of semi-interior space. And then you have the rest here of your apartment as you had it before. That's the existing building. The whole thing has just been sort of clad onto it. perfect way of regeneration and in a way also coexistence. Now, in my text, I'm ending on this note with La Quatorze Vassal. I want to go one step further here, and we're coming to an end. The interior exterior, somehow the La Quatorze Vassal inspired me to add this, because there is this thing and this sort of box or element that is added to the typical apartment that is unclear whether it is inside or outside. Just like in the first building that I showed you of La Quatorze Vassal, the one with the pines, you're not quite sure whether you're in or outside. And that is something that I think is very much happening now in our times, that we are longing to introduce the exterior into the interior, especially maybe in these past 2 years of having been inside quite a bit. And we also need to understand how we can create better interiors, atmospherically, with light and air and all these kinds of things. This is a very known project. I'm sure you've all seen it. It's the Weather Project by Olaf Oliason in the Tate Modern, long time ago, I think 2003 or something like that. And, he just put a huge sun into this interior space. And people were just like, oh my God, wow. London, as we know, is a pretty cloudy space. So people were drawn into this building, and they were just lying on the floor and enjoying this light. Energy thing. Another work is the mediated motion, also already, 20 years old, in another museum, actually in Bregenz, a museum that was built by Peter Sumtor there, which is a place that is a very neutral, very taken back, very clean space, which inspired Oliason to bring in more climatic conditions. And amongst them, there's this sort of humidity fog space that you usually would probably find outside in the mountains surrounding the city, Bregenz, which is surrounded by mountains. And he also showed this riverbed there. And this is actually a photograph from another exhibition that happened later, but where he just brings this outside into a building so that we can experience these things inside. I'm not hoping that this will necessarily be happening in the future, but I think it's just something to take time and reflect about what is an interior and what is an exterior. And this is a very recent work of his life, which he installed in Basel at the Biola Foundation. It's a strange biotope. The ceiling lights are growing lights for bacteria. And in this green water that we're seeing on the ground, there are, when the lights are on, these sort of bacteria growing. And when they are off, it all looks a little bit different. But so he's like with this light, trying to encourage some biotope in this water. And so the visitors are just walking over these walkways and try to understand where they have ended up, and whether it is an interior or an exterior. So now, when speaking about this work, Oliason, and I think that's a no-brainer almost, is also referring to a work again some 50 years ago, No Stop City from Archizum Associati. And many of you might know this work, and I hope you do, because this is where 50 years ago, the Architettura Radicale, radical architecture, was sort of hinting society already at this thing on the horizon. What is actually happening? We are more and more inside. We are building huge buildings. We have problems, environmental problems, atmospherical problems. So they were sort of talking about these issues, and they wanted us to think about this. Now it's 50 years later, and we're probably slowly understanding what they were talking about. The No-Stop City is, here are a couple of sketches, which I think are really, really beautiful, most likely by Andrea Bramsi, one of Archizum. But what is actually really amazing, so these are the plans that they promoted for No-Stop City. I mean, the title again says it all. And these plans, they are just showing a grid. And in this grid, a lot of things can happen. This is a classic thing here. So these are whatever. They might be walls, they might be hedges, something like that. And other than that, this is a grid for plugs, for columns, for pipes, and all kinds of things. What is really beautiful about this is these plans in 1969 were actually written. They were written on a typewriter. So when you really look into that, just see dots and X's and O's and, stuff like that. And they use that in order to, provide us with a code of what this No-Stop City could be. Most likely the typewriter that they used was an Olivetti. I told you at the beginning about Ettore Sozzas and him being the chief designer for Olivetti. And that is so that is maybe exactly that piece that produced these plans. With that, I think we're coming to an end, and I want to end on this quote by Italian artist Lara Favaretto, which is something that I find quite fitting and strong in this moment. In an extended mobile present, the future may already have taken place, and the past may still be taking shape. I'll leave it at that, and thank you.
Thank you, Karen. That was a beautiful presentation, and I loved how you took us full circle from the 60s into the present and the future, and then back to the 60s.
Zigzag.
It is zigzag, but yeah. Like figure eight.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad.
It was really amazing, and I, as I was watching the little text appear on the bottom that was transcribing your lecture, I realized so many terms that are coming up within the discussions of the environment are not being transcribed correctly, right? So these are terms that are actually kind of part of our everyday use, but not really. And so I posted some of them in the chat. I hope that wasn't too distracting for you, but I was kind of looking up. If you open the chat, you'll see, like when you talk about the biotope and the Anthropocene, those are things that, to some of our students, these terms are very familiar if they're part of this discourse, and to others, they're kind of probably trying to understand them for the first time. And so I brought some of those definitions into the chat. But what
Anna, sorry to interrupt you. Thank you for doing that, because what I actually wanted to do, but I didn't get around to doing that, was to actually have a whole link list for these various works. Many of the pieces in my text have links, but then there are these other pieces. So, but you can just look them up and you find so much. It's just been very beautiful to prepare this, actually. So thank you for the opportunity.
Well, but it's we're kind of slightly formal, of course, every time things are live and recorded. But at the same time, I think this is an opportunity for the students really to begin to ask questions and to have a bit of an informal conversation. So I really would love to encourage anybody who's in this room to ask Karen, to take the opportunity really to slow things down, to go a little bit deeper into some of your own interests, and to ask some questions. And feel free to unmute or to type them in the chat, and I can kind of relay these things. I can help to facilitate if that's necessary. In fact, let's do this. Let's take a 5-minute break, because we've talked now, I gave a 1-hour conversation, right? So let's take a 5-minute break. Let's take a 5-minute break and reconvene. And I really ask the students to consider during this time a question or even just a topic of conversation. Maybe some of the terms were interesting to you. Maybe some of the artists and architects and writers and curators, and you'd like to learn more. Maybe there's something that you've started working on in your own thesis project, and you'd like to make a connection, and you'd like to understand how some of these topics kind of intersect with your own interests. So let's do that. Let's take a 5-minute break, and we come back around 11:22, and we'll kind of open all the videos and the mics, and we'll have a kind of open discussion.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you. Beautiful, we're back. Okay, so I invite all the students to come back to Zoom, to unmute, turn on your video, and maybe ask some questions, some leading questions or some comments for Karen.
Will make it easier. Maybe we should talk about where sort of uncertainties are. It's like, I could imagine that a lot of things that I've been showing are actually also confusing, and or I might have been a bit fast, and so you want to know more details, or so understand now, how do we actually translate this into a architectural context or to a design task, since you're all in this process of phrasing your thesis into, it's like, how can you actually use what I've shown you? So really, I know it is a lot and it is overwhelming, and that's just the nature of the matter. We're just part of it. It's not going to change. There's no solution right here in front of us. So just go for it. It's totally okay. And we can also just speak about, we don't need to talk about what you've seen, but we could speak about your ideas. You just say, okay, I've been thinking about this and that for my thesis, sort of to just give it a bit of a jump start and think, okay, in what context can we discuss it? So it's just a conversation about that. That's also possible.
I guess I have a question that I've kind of been wrestling with. A lot of the examples that you put forth and discussed really kind of talk about the ephemera of the environment, the kind of intangible aspects of it. And I think for me, at least, starting to really develop this kind of conversation, it's been a bit complicated trying to figure out how to kind of focus and restrain this kind of untouchable quality without it getting too large, without, starting to talk about everything at once. And is there a way to kind of focus that you would suggest so that there's still clarity out of this intangible?
Yeah, I think that is very thoughtful, very, very good. You're very aware of the problem, and I do think that when you look at most of this work, they are all addressing one issue. It's almost like they pick out a pixel. Yeah. So Thomas Saracino, since many years, is looking at spiders, and then he finds these similarities in completely other scales, and he, and translates that. I think translation is a big topic. Yeah. So you see something, and you're fascinated by it, and then you try to make it into an installation. Yeah. And there is, I think there is always, in the arts, there's maybe like a more direct thing, because it's simply, well, not simply, but it is like about what you are interested in, and you put it out. And then when we come into architecture, we think we have to have a reason for that. Yeah. But I think the reason is already there by, that moment that you are becoming alert to it. So let's come back to Saracino. He, there's a lot of stuff floating on the internet, a lot of interviews with him, and I think it's beautiful the way he talks about his work. He started looking into these cobwebs because he was interested in the structural part of the cobwebs. Yeah, just trying to understand, how do they do that? How does this hold? Why is it so super stable? Why can they build that so quickly? These are all totally structural engineering questions. It's only that these are spiders. Yeah. And then he takes that and he brings that into a space and lets people move through it. And then he, starts to look and what the elements are doing with these things. Yeah. So this last image that I showed, this lightweight fabric that is reacting to airflows and so on. So he just continues and continues. But these are works that he's developed over some 20 years, if not longer. So it comes, you just want to get started. Yeah. So in a way, I would say he's still talking about cobwebs. And he's just, because he's been on it for quite a while, he's found a lot of different ways of talking about cobwebs and bringing them into relation so that he can explain to us why he's doing this. Yeah. So he's not addressing more than that. Yeah. So he's not talking about big environmental issues or something like that. He's just interested in how to make visible what spiders are doing, because he knows that most of us humans would not ever look at spiders, even though he makes us do that in his installations. But he's trying to translate it for us. And that's where I think you could start. When you're fascinated with something, you change the scale, you change material, you look at it from different perspectives, through the eyes of different protagonists or something like that. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden you can create a whole series of approaches. Is that?
Yeah, no, I think that definitely helps. I think you mentioned something that I think I always struggle with is the when translating it to architecture, the need that there has to be a reason. And I think trying to explain everything, that it's, you've solved the problem from the building aspect, the socioeconomic aspect, the environmental aspect. And I think especially at this stage, to just focus on one of them and to clarify the point and the argument and just the realm of study is very helpful.
Paige, I think there is a reason for everything in life. So there's definitely a reason for a spider to build a cobweb the way it is. Yeah. And so they just react to what they find in the environment. And then they, just for survival reasons, they sort of connect all these things. Yeah. It's pretty much what we do in architecture. I could say, yeah. There's also clearly a reason for somebody like Saracino or all these examples that I've been showing to do exactly what they are doing. Yeah. So when we look at Amy Balkan and her public smog, she's really been thinking about how can I get people involved. Yeah, and this is what she's doing since whatever 15 years or something like that, and really, really trying new avenues always. Yeah, so and not tiring on this. I put a link to her website, which is called Tomorrow Morning, into the chat. And when you look at other projects, you see that there's the moment you're really interested in something and really fascinated, you will find so many ways of communicating this. And that is what architecture is doing. We are communicating space. We are, by creating these spaces, we are making them important. And that is why these should be great spaces. And they can be inspired by a lot of things. And I think especially all these environmental questions that we're having now, airflow, light, temperatures, bacteria, smog, whatever you want to call it, it's all the same. It all affects us and we are affecting it. I think these are things that are hinting at architecture, and they make architecture more fluid. And that could be very beautiful because we have the material and the technology for it now. It's all coming together.
Karen, you mentioned just now like that, some things are not visible, and how to make things visible, in the work of some of the artists. And you also mentioned this in relationship with Per Wiig's biotopes. We can't see the ants, but they're there. There's a kind of invisibility to some of the scales of interaction and intervention, whether they're kind of spatially small or large or temporally small or large outside of our perception in a way of time and space. And I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more to that, to the idea of making something visible, to bringing something to the foreground that maybe has always been present, but we haven't paid attention to, and the role of representation and architecture in that process.
Oh yeah, that's a beautiful task. So let's take something very Los Angeles. Los Angeles is a very dusty city, right? It's because we don't have much humidity here. So when you go outside and touch something that maybe you wiped off a day before, you already have this dust on your hands again. So it's kind of like, oh, black fingers. And so people are always saying, oh my God, this is like, the smog. But I don't, I'm not too worried about, okay, yeah, of course we have smog, yeah, but let's just take it as a normal element of our times. When you then look through a window and the sunlight comes in, you will most likely see a layer of dust on that window, and you think, oh, these windows need to be cleaned. But I'm always thinking, I'm always thankful when I see that sort of winter sun, this low sun shine through the windows, and I see all these amazing traces of what's going on outside. Yeah, some lines of some old rain that has developed a crust of dust from outside. Maybe some insects that have been crashing against the glass. Maybe some dripping from the roof or something like that. So you become, all of a sudden, when you really look at it, you become aware of what is going on, and you have it on your window. So a window is not only something to look through, but it's also something to look at. You can say it's ugly, but you can also say, oh, very interesting. There are all these traces of what happens outside. over a certain time, and then eventually you just erase it because you're cleaning your windows, because we want to look at something else. I think it's very much about looking at things, and just the first work that I was showing, this video air about these photographs of looking at the horizon, over years and years. I mean, I don't know how many photographs are in this video. Many. And yeah, you just look at air again and again and again, and it always looks different. So there is no invisibility. It is just that we don't know how to look at it. And I think that's a big difference. If we want to look at something like the work of Lacaton Vassal, a lot of people, they say they buy a plot of land and they say, I want to build my house on it. There are all these trees. Now, what do? Either you're not allowed to take those trees, cut those trees, or you have to replant new trees and all of that. But they were just saying, okay, these trees, they are there. They've been there before. And we try to work around it. So all of a sudden, it's not about a house, but it's about trees and a house that is sort of going around it. So there's, again, this coexistence that is coming in there. And I think that is when you formulate your thesis, when you look at what you want to do, it is always important to come back to it again and then look at it from another perspective and come back to it again. One thing that I probably should have said, because it's also concerning the invisible, is I'm very drawn to the action of editing as a real action. Yeah, so editing is not only something that you do to text or film, which is what one usually thinks. Yeah, so you edit a text, you cut, copy, paste, blah, blah, blah. And when you edit a movie, same thing. Yeah, so you can actually really significantly change the story and the whole narrative of something. Now, you can also edit urbanism, by sort of not only by taking a building away, but sort of by adding plants, by adding public space, by shifting vision corridors, by attracting our views to certain things in public space or something like that. And you can do the same to architecture. You can do the same to objects. It's about maybe finding a right title for things. That's one thing. And it is about really working very clearly on visualizations so that whoever looks at a work or a piece of architecture or something is also really following your intention. So you're pretty much writing a script for something. And then things that are previously invisible become visible. That's probably a little bit esoteric, but I don't think there is anything invisible. It's about us having to be open to look at things.
Thank you, Karen. Actually, like a lot of the example that you have shown earlier, I have a lot of the Olaf Oliason in my example as a reference for my thesis topic too, because it has to do with light. And how architecture interacts with light and how light interact with architecture as well. So what Anna has asked is exactly one of the questions that I have, like, how do I make it visible in my project? So thank you for giving some examples and using the plants. That's something that really helpful. But just kind of have another question that maybe like some tips that you can maybe advise can offer me, because a lot of the artwork example that I've researched and also the ones that you have shown, it's like very intense research that was done over like probably years of time. Obviously the intensity and also the message was very clear because of a prolonged period of time was and effort put into it. And for our thesis, we don't have that luxury. We only have probably like 4 or 5 months realistically to work on something like this. So what would be your tips or advice to us that in terms of coming up with a meaningful project that could give maybe not equal, but like, about that kind of like intensity and message for our project?
Oh, beautiful. I was aware of it. I'm totally aware of it. Let me say one thing to begin with to demystify the whole thing. Yeah, it's not even so much research, but it is just the joy of seeing exhibitions. Yeah, and when it's I think it's important to take all the opportunities that you can get to see exhibitions. So sometimes here in LA, there are amazing galleries, small art galleries, private galleries. And it's nice to just go to a place and see one piece of work, and then you go again. Yeah. And then there are the big exhibitions that are sometimes overwhelming and sometimes super inspiring. That depends. Yeah. But what I think is really important to answer your question for a short-term work, a focused work, is to keep something like a visual journal. And I understand that's what you're doing. So you have this task of keeping this logbook journal, something like that, and to take that very seriously. Because when you do that, then you pay attention to your daily whatever's, it's something that you see. You get up and you say, oh, it's a cloudy day. Okay. Or there's a certain noise, or in your case, you're saying light is really important. So have a task where you say, okay, every day I have a note or a sketch or a collage or something like that in my journal about light, whatever has happened. So all of a sudden it's like getting dark outside and you realize, oh, I didn't really do that. Well, you do. So then maybe you have to put a lamp on, or you have to go outside and search for light, or it's a reflection, something like that. If you take this really seriously, and second task, naming it names, giving it titles, then I think you can keep yourself very focused on something. Because it might take something like a half hour a day. I don't know. Well, sometimes also all of a sudden takes you 3 hours a day, sometimes 10 minutes. But you will see that when you then look back a couple of days or weeks, that there's definitely material that you can use, and you will also evolve. You will become more precise in the titling. And I think that's very important. It's important when somebody says, hey, what are you doing? That you can answer that question. And that is why I find the titles so incredibly important. Design of a floor on which your steps will be uncertain. Wow. Or Saracino's filaments and so on. I always have to read this. I don't remember this title, but it is so precise where he describes what he's actually seeing and doing. And that helps whoever you talk to about your work, but it also helps yourself. So it frames something. So I think journal and titling every day is super important. Number one. Number two, go out and walk around, and we can do that. And if you can't see exhibitions,
I love exhibition.
Okay, great. So you're done. I mean that really it is so much about that. And it's also okay, and that's the last thing I'm going to say here is what is super important to me is just randomly looking at books or magazines or something like that. I'm in a total dilemma because all my books are on the other half of this planet, and I've come here just a few weeks before COVID and I never went back, so I don't have my books with me, and it really is a challenge. So now recently I had somebody photograph my bookshelf. So at least I have the book back. So and I'm sometimes like, okay, that one and that one. And, you know, and I have some old literature lists so I can sort of recall it in my memory. But it is so amazing to just go into a bookshop or also just look at one of these few remaining amazing magazine stands that you still find in Hollywood or in Fairfax or something. You look at titles, you just flip through things. You know, there's a lot to be said about relaxation when you look through a book. And it's about that. It's not about being glued in research. That can come later when you really know what you're looking at, what you want to research. Yeah. But first, it's about the inspiration and that journaling of that.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Funny, I'm seeing people nodding when I say certain things, or sometimes I'm also seeing some confusion on faces, and really just let's just talk about it.
I'm really happy, Karen, that you bring up this idea of the logbook or something that really organizes thinking, where not every single day you notice change, but from one day to the next, that kind of process becomes visible. So it's something that takes time actually to bring to the foreground and to understand, you know, just like the Horizons project that you showed at the very beginning of your talk, where not any one horizon is important on its own, but it's really the accumulation of that visual data that allows us to perceive that change. And so I think to Sue's question, it's a really important thing to kind of link our research to some of these formats with which we're actually kind of arming ourselves to begin to understand how to put words on some of these effects and some of these things that actually take time to develop.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Actually, when you mentioned about plants, I kind of like subconsciously did it without knowing. Like Anna had asked us to do the logbook, take pictures of anything that related to our research. And I was actually cannot make a decision what I should be taking pictures of. I have a bunch of plants in my living room, so I regularly take pictures of them already. And and then just seeing how lights interact with the plants and the water moisture that comes from the leaves. So it's just already something that I do, but I didn't know that it was something that could be inspiring to my thesis. So thank you for mentioning this little things that can make a difference. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Sue. And you know what? I think there's also this thing of finding different ways of using your logbook. Yeah. So logbook is like it's a lot of things. Yeah. In an airplane, it's a black box. So for some people, it's a journal, like a book. Yeah, where you write. Then it can be a folder where you throw a lot of stuff in. Yeah, from your receipt to postcards. Who uses postcards? Okay, like to some piece that you found in the garden, some clipping from something that you've seen, all kinds of things. Yeah, and it can be so much more than that. It can also be a box. Yeah, I would challenge, unless this is unless you really have to have a logbook, but I don't think so. You can have a box, a pool, where you just throw everything in, and then sometimes you sort through it and you know, clip a couple of things together, and then you change that again. The famous wall is still pretty good. Just have things in front of you. I'm having a wall here in front of me, and that I'm looking at all the time. And one thing that I find quite important, especially because you're mentioning looking at plants, is actually not only the photographing, but even spend more time with it. Yeah, try to make a drawing of a detail of a plant. A friend of mine who is fascinated with stones, she eventually did a PhD in art, and her PhD was writing about the process of drawing stones. And it's been crazy. It's been amazing. Yeah. It's because she's been really putting these rocks on her desk, and then she developed techniques, with different pens and different materials and so on to actually best draw or paint these stones. And so that was already a whole process, and she wrote about that. Then it was about, where are these stones coming from? What story do they have? The geological heritage, how she got to these stones and so on. So it became like a multifaceted thing. And I think when you say that you want to work with light, or, anyone else who has a specific interest here in our group, when you say something like that, then understand also what that actually means. Light is, light from lamps. There is the artificial light. There is growing light. There is a ray of light. There is the light, the flash. When you have a thunderstorm and you have this sudden, really irritating flash, and there's light that hurts your eyes. There's comforting light. And all these things then create responses also, or they demand responses. So the most obvious one is probably your sunshades or something like that. Yeah. And when you look around LA, people, when you look at houses here, buildings, it's always about keeping the light out because it's too bright. Yeah. And so it's generally mostly about that. Yeah. And so there's all of a sudden this whole history of the light shade and things like that, which is a design element, a very important one. I remember Elena Manfredi, Elena, so not you, it was Angelica. Angelica Lorenzi, she had an exhibition at the Woodbury, at the gallery at Woodbury, which was actually about the Californian element of the brise soleil, of this light controlling device that is such an important detail to the case study houses and so on. And unfortunately, I didn't see the exhibition. I just saw a couple of pictures from it. But, there can be a fascination all of a sudden that becomes a very, classic design task, classic like this. And just out of your observations. Mm-hmm. Seems as if I got the light blue sky as a background, and everybody else has a sunshade drawn or something like that. You have a different green background, blue-green, the swimming pool, sort of. It's a bit like that.
Karen, did you see the studio last semester that Gordon Keeping organized? And some students I see here were in that class, Ian, you're here, where they were growing plants inside of SCI-Arc and thinking through a kind of roof garden of a kind of green roof of constructed plants. But what was so special, I thought, about the studio was the actual growing of the plants and the kind of infrastructure that went along with them. Ian, were you thinking of working with some of these ideas from last semester into your thesis, or are you thinking of something else?
I was thinking of doing the complete opposite of that. No, I'm kidding. I might include some of the things that we talked about. I think the challenge of doing that in school indoors, where we were in a studio that had like no direct sunlight, was trying to figure out how to use artificial lighting to sort of replicate all of the conditions. But then again, it's like there's a lot of things with humidity and like the air quality of the interior that we weren't able to control. But in a way, it was sort of like at least we were able to like talk about that and like sort of think about those things, even though we weren't able to fully make like a successful version of like a green space indoors. But yeah.
What about the parking lot? What about thinking? Sorry, go ahead.
No, exactly. I was just going to say parking lot, roof.
Is anybody thinking of ways in which you are actually organizing your own environment, your working environment, or the way in which the project comes together on the desk versus, you know, yes, as we're thinking through this outside of the doors of SCI-Arc even. Ian, would that be an option to like start thinking of the kind of the studio space as an environment, as something that takes you beyond the kind of the screen that we're all staring into right now?
Yeah, I wish we did have, I wish we had like a little bit more of an opportunity to explore that. I think all of the projects in our class last semester had some sort of outdoor planting element. But like, given the scale of everything, it was just like difficult because it was like a huge building for most of us. But definitely.
So Ian, give me a bit more background, because I'm not aware of this studio, and it is something that is very dear to me, because I do think that we need a different air quality in the building, and plants would help a lot. So one thing is we need to take care of the plants, but the plants are also taking care of us. So there's again this coexistence thing, right? And of course. What I'm trying to understand now, and what you were doing, it seems you were doing real experiments. So you had real plants in the building, and so you were sort of using them as testing elements or something like that to see how the plants were responding to the building. Is that right?
Yeah, I think the way the studio was structured was that like the actual like physical plant part of the project didn't really have to have like a direct relationship with our design, like at our final project. But altogether, we sort of we played with like physical wood like sculptures. We each made totems. And then we obviously have the plant aspect of it. And all of us, we did like, you know, different types of plants and had different conditions. Some used like hydroponics, some sort of like me used just like the UV lights. And some, like a lot of people, or not a lot of people, some people did like edible plants, some didn't, some did native plants. So there was a variety. But then at the end, it was to sort of bring it all together in sort of like a haphazard way, but like I think that's just the nature of like doing something so complex as, you know, like the environment and plants and also wood construction, which is why we were sort of experimenting with like wood joinery early on in the semester. So at the end, the project had to have some sort of wood element as like a construction material, speculatively, obviously. And then, of course, some of us used like energy generation as part of the building. And actually, I mean, if you're interested, we have a website with our projects on there, like a blog spot. Let me pull it up. And please excuse the name of the studio. And I think it's a little bit messy because I think once the semester ended, we didn't really go back to like clean it up. But I think if you go to like the arrange tab, there's like a final like a finals page, and I think all of our projects by name are on there.
Wow. Okay. So so that's great, because there's actually also quite a lot of knowledge already about, sort of biotopes. And, there's always something that there was two things I think involved when once you work with the environment. One thing is simply knowledge, and the other thing is experience. And one thing is, to study things and read up about it and ask people and so on. And then the other thing is to try it out. And I think everything, when it comes to, living, anything living, needs that experience part, because otherwise it doesn't work. It's like we have it when we have, plants indoor, and from one day to another, all the leaves are falling, and you wonder what happened. And it's probably because all of a sudden there's this kind of cold phase, and you put the heating on, and the whole air humidity, which we humans are just not really feeling, because we're just too, I don't know, we're not checking in with ourselves as much. But a plant will show you right away when there's a drop in space humidity, in the atmosphere, when there's a change in the whole atmosphere, let it be light or humidity or anything like that. A plant shows you that, and that is actually why it is so nice to live with plants. That they will be always the first indicator. They will just, say, okay, you know what, you are living in bad air, and they let the leaves drop. So then there is this other part, and I like the pink on your website here of the studio, which is the growing lamp. So this is now what we are doing. That we are trying to produce a lot of plant life, especially for the edible industry and so on, indoors. Create artificial atmospheres and control light. When you're flying over a country like the Netherlands, they have this incredible food production, small country. It's like you fly over it, and you just fly over greenhouses, and at night they are lit up in this orange pink light. So you're flying over this crazy pinkish surface, and it's just full of vegetables that are supplying pretty much all of Europe. And I'm sure there are other areas worldwide that have similar situations. And it is something that has become quite normal, because we are so many more people on this planet, and there is, a need for food supply, and this is definitely a way of doing it. But it's not that easy. So there are computers involved that are constantly checking in on the perfect temperature, on the perfect humidity levels and light levels and things like that. In that respect, actually something to look at. You might have heard about that exhibition Countryside that was at the Guggenheim. When was that? In 2020 or something? I mean, in full COVID time. I think nobody's pretty much seen this exhibition because it was mostly closed. OMA's exhibition, or AMO's exhibition on the countryside, which has been a long time study they've been doing on how actually agriculture and everything that we are doing in the outdoors has changed over the decades, from being this, recreational space and a little bit of agriculture to something that has, become a space for many other things, and among them landscape, the agricultural landscape is a more often industrial form, but a good industry. And then there are so many other things that are actually adding to it, because it's not that people are working the fields anymore, but more it is robots and drones and things like that are working the fields, right? And so there are a lot of different examples in this exhibition there's a book about it with some essays about all kinds of different things that are happening actually in the countryside. It's pretty interesting. Yeah. Just how we gauge the atmosphere, and that's it's something what we need to do with the interior of spaces. Yeah, I mean, I think our technology is way ahead of us. We can do so much more to our interiors. We don't need to just press a button and have some old AC system blow some pretty, sort of bad air around. there is more to it. Yeah, and to create these interior exterior spaces, I think it's a great challenge. Also because maybe the exterior and interior is not really the right expression anymore. It's a little bit like this confusion between the artificial and the natural that we have now, that we don't really know where does the natural end and where does the artificial begin, and what is that? So the interior exterior is the next thing here on the agenda that is a bit confusing. And that's a good one, because I think if we can bring a little bit more exterior into the interior, that's great. If we treat the exterior as an interior, we probably take more care of the exterior and what we are doing to it in terms of pollution and things like that. These are big topics, and I think the beginning, this studio that you've done in the last semester is probably just the beginning of it. So if you say now you want to do just the opposite, what would that be?
I honestly, I don't know, but I feel like there is something about the replication of our natural environment in the digital sphere that I don't know. Actually, I'm curious what your opinion on that would be, because I think that's a touchy one.
Well, I think that actually logs into into what I just said about this exhibition Countryside, and I would totally encourage you to look at that book, which is called Countryside. It's a tiny little book, silver, strange, and there are probably some essays that would be very helpful for you. I recall one specifically which amused me actually, but even though it's a really serious story, but it was somehow so, I don't know, it was just so funny, which is about Fukushima, the area in Japan that is completely contaminated because of the tsunami and the destruction of the nuclear power station there and all of that. Yeah, so super toxic. And the Japanese have been thinking how they can clean this up. And they're working on this since a long time, as we all know, and also making progress. But they didn't want to send people there, of course, because it's so contaminated. So the Japanese always like robots, and they're incredibly good at developing robots. And so they've been looking into all kinds of specialized robots that can work on this cleanup and also communicate with each other. And they have started using this whole area of Fukushima pretty much as a testing ground for all kinds of robots to see how they can make the robots better. So they are actually doing this in two different ways. I mean, they're sort of, they're winning on two different ends. Let's put it like that. Yeah. So on the one hand, they are slowly managing to clean up the toxic ground with all this waste and that is contaminated and so on. And they're starting to bring out this waste and recycle it, whatever other way they get rid of it. I don't know exactly the details. But then a lot of these robots are breaking down eventually. So the work is just too tough. And that's really the sad part, that even a robot just doesn't manage. then they have to develop another robot that is sort of communicating with a almost dead robot, saying, hey, what's your problem? So they have to check into the black box. And then they have to develop a better robot that then, takes over the work of the robot that broke down. So it's a constant evolving. And the scientists that are working on this, they are actually really challenged by it, but they're also very thankful for this challenge, because had there not been this disaster, they would have not developed these things so quickly. Yeah. But because of this, they were given a lot more funds. A lot more people were really following their work. So, they really have to get this done, because they have to, clean this place up. So that's a good part about it, right? I mean, there's always a sad and a good thing. This is the big opportunity, is that there's a lot going into robotic development to clean this place up. I really enjoyed reading that article. It's a short one, it's not online. I think one's really gotta find the book, but maybe it's even in the library. I could imagine it's in the library. I think it is actually. So have a look at SCI-Arc's library. It should be in there. It's called Countryside, and there are many more really interesting things. And when you look at OMA's website, you would probably also find more about the project. Should be, yeah. So I would actually absolutely say, this is the way to go, to find a challenge. I mean, it's like, where's actually technology useful to support nature, and where is technology learning from nature? There are all these different facets. Yeah. I mean, technology is learning a lot from nature. We're constantly looking at biological patterns and things like that. And that is so beautiful. And then we translate them into something new. And I think there are these two ways, to look at what technology can contribute to, let's say, better landscapes, something like that. And how it can also learn actually from, the experience of landscape, because landscape has been around for a long time. Yeah. So there's a back and forth. There are always these two sides. Yeah. Does that make sense, Ian?
Great. Thank you so much. That was a lot to look up on. I'll definitely go do that.
I'm seeing in the chat, Biao, you have been writing something into the chat. Do you want to talk more about it?
Yes. Last semester I was in another studio, and we had some designs about a veteran campus. And I did a lot of designs about landscape. So I just have been thinking about what is the landscape and what the landscape brings to people, to the campus. So after I did some research, I'm more and more interested in how to make the landscape more meaningful. I mean, to abstract people to going out to the outside. And I just realized the landscape is the key part of the campus, because there are a lot of buildings in the campus, and there are also a lot of buildings in the other place, but not the area can be called campus. So I'm more interested in how to make these landscapes more meaningful and make sense to people who need to public space like this. Yeah.
I think that's really great. Just to understand, so you're considering to continue working with the veteran campus for your thesis?
Not the veteran campus. I just thinking about as usually I think the campus is for students to study in school.
Yeah.
But after I did a research on veteran campus, I just thinking about maybe there are lots of people like veterans or some other people, they may also need a campus to live in, to social with people, to hang out with people, or study some stuffs in the campus. Maybe like just like us, when we after we graduate from school, we need a place to. Maybe we need a place like school, but we don't have to bear the pressure of the study. So maybe you can just find a place to enjoy the happiness of the study or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I find this really good that you're talking about this, because, there's some interesting observation to be made about Los Angeles, if we just stay here for a moment with the campus, which is that Los Angeles has actually a very small amount of public space per capita. It's a study that we did at the Now Institute, and it's shocking, because when you look at Los Angeles on Google or something, it all looks so green and blah blah blah. There's a lot of private green space, and then golf courses and stuff like that. And then there's also a large concentration of public parks in some areas. Those are usually the more affluent areas. When you look further into South LA, other areas, and you will find very little public space. And if it is sort of a leftover triangular traffic junction that has been turned into some playground, and you really wonder what, who's going to get to this playground, because you have to cross streets all the time. And, this is kind of really pretty drab. Yeah, let's put it like that. Now, the question of the campus is really beautiful, because it is something that is so important to keep you focused and to give you the opportunity of exactly what I've been saying earlier, to go outside and just look at what's happening and get some inspiration. Yeah. So you want to just go and be out there. I always think that SCI-Arc's campus is the whole area around it, what we sort of call the arts district. And one should just sort of take it over, guerrilla takeover of the whole area, and find it green. Is just be there, just hang around, just show presence. Yeah, and that is the beginning of a campus. Yeah, you have to be out there and claim space. Yeah, so that's one thing. And that is actually what plants are doing. You look around, you have a little crack in the concrete, and some plant is coming through there. Now, that's something really fascinating here in LA. When it has rained a little bit, all of a sudden plants are coming through everything. And then they go dry again, and then they come back, and all of that. So the more you really are aware of these little things, the more you can also imagine the big things. Yeah, because if you give them a little bit more space, if you crack open the concrete a little bit more, or the asphalt or blacktop, whatever, you can just give the existing, the stuff that's under that concrete, a bit more space, and it will come. Yeah, that is the amazing thing about Los Angeles. Yeah, and you will create more public space. Yeah. So if you say you want to work on a campus, I think that's a really great idea. And I would start with looking at what a campus really is for you. Yeah, because when we think campus, we think university. Mm-hmm. It can be so many more things. Yeah, so I think it'd be great for you if you could just find something to describe your campus, what it should be, and begin there. And I'm pretty sure if you use the logbook approach, a journal, visual archive, something like that, you'll get there quite quickly.
Yeah, but last semester I designed some landscape and infrastructure structures. I just make this kind of things more abstraction. So I'm not sure for the next step. Should I need to make these stuff more details or keep going on, keep these things more abstraction. I like to design a lot of textures, but I don't want to make these textures have no meanings. So I just want to make these textures of landscape or some stuffs. They could have meanings to represent the different things. So for this moment, I'm not sure I could make some detailed stuffs for the campus, but I'm not sure. I just did some diagrams to how to think about the campus. And I still have a lot of questions about what the landscape, what the infrastructure, and
You know what? I think you should have a closer look at the Jade Eco Park that I was showing today. This park in Taiwan, in Taizhou.
Yeah.
Because that seems very close to what you're talking about. You want to have a reason for this campus to happen. You want it to contribute something. You want it to be productive, to not just be some whatever accumulation of design items for the fun of it or something like that. But you want it to really do something, yeah. And I think that's great. So there you really have an outline for your project, because when you look at the Jade Eco Park, the beginning of that project was to actually the opportunity of having this abandoned airport, and obviously the openness of the city to say, okay, this is not going to be this is not going to be developed as more urban development in the sense of buildings, but it actually needs this recreational thing, and we need to work on environmental issues to help mitigate the climate in the city. Because this park is not only influencing the climate just there in the park, but it is also having a huge influence on parts of the city. Yeah, so I would really recommend you to look at that. And I think all these various buildings and follies and items that are cooling and drying up place and filtering humidity and things like that, they're pretty inspiring stuff. Another example I would highly recommend you is actually in Milan, in Italy, not built yet by OMA. Seem to be quoting them a lot today. It's the Agenti Climatici. So Milan has a lot of rail yards that are not really used anymore. And they've been having this idea of turning them into parks. And I don't know, OMA somehow won a competition for 2 of these rail yards. One is more in the city center and one is a little bit further in the periphery. And they've been doing a study together with a landscape firm, a local landscape firm, to understand how the winds are blowing, because Milan in the summer is really stuffy and humid, and in the winter it gets a lot of smog. So it's kind of like a challenge. And so they want these parks really to contribute to the environmental mitigation in the city. Yeah, and there are some really beautiful ideas out there where they're looking into winds that are coming steadily from one direction in the summer to sort of help them to sort of file them, filter them into the city, and they're looking at waterways and all kinds of things. So that's definitely something to be looking at. And Anna, I'm so thankful that you're constantly putting everything into the chat. You're looking at it and putting it into the chat. It's really amazing. So I definitely encourage you to look at both of these examples, and I think that will help you understand what can be done with what you find in a place. Yeah, so one doesn't need to bring a lot of new stuff to a place only, but there's sometimes really a good start for a project is to look at what is already there. Just sort of dig it out under the concrete.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. I also think, in the conversations of figure grounds, somehow a lot of, I think many of us, or a lot of us even just working in architecture, have spent time on the figure, and now to bring that attention to grounds and to background, the kind of infrastructure that holds things in place, which, Biao, to your question about the campus, is exactly that, becomes so fundamental. Like the ground becomes the foreground in many ways. So
yeah.
I noticed in the chat, Catherine, you mentioned a project. I think this was when we were still talking about Fukushima. I'm not sure. Would you like to speak a little bit about? I didn't know about it. It's really fascinating.
Oh yeah, I found this project was in the Milan Triennale, the Broken Nature exhibition, and it's just a pair of high heels that you would while they're being worn or walked around, and they would be planting rape seeds, which I guess have their blossoms absorb radioactive substances to some degree. And so using just generally walking as like a means of almost reparation. And I think it's interesting that they tied it into fashion, especially since fast fashion is, can be so harmful to the environment. And Karen, you had mentioned like reusing, or the designer that is kind of bringing up those topics and reusing the materials, but in this way, the fashion is part of healing the environment to some degree. So I don't know, I found that super interesting. And then in a way, it also starts designing in the environment just through the interaction you have with the environment is directly designing it in the sense that, maybe not at an instantaneous time scale, but at a more geological scale of time, your actions would start planting flowers in these bushes along the path. So I don't know, it was super interesting to me. And obviously it touches a bit on the opportunistic design and not necessarily in the high funded grant research robots that you had brought up, but a similarly opportunistic ideation, I guess.
Sorry, Catherine. There was a moment when I couldn't quite understand you at the beginning of what you were saying, but then I got the end of it. Can I? A little bit dumb. I'm sorry for this, but I wanted to ask you: do you have already a direction of where you want to work? Do you want to speak about that as well, or maybe I missed it?
No, the link I posted, it isn't directly related to, I'm not entirely quite sure of a direction. I am interested in kind of aesthetic and political implications of the environment. And so I guess it does, in a way, am trying in a way of kind of what Paige mentioned at the very beginning of how to clarify a direction or like stay focused on one thing when all of the images or things kind of provoke several directions. So I don't necessarily have a specific train of thought leading into my thesis for this, but yeah.
No, but you were mentioning something. So you were actually looking into the political issues, and that was interesting to you, if I got this right. It's something that is, first of all, super important, of course, as we know. But I do think that the work of Amy Balkin in that respect is crucial, and I admire her for her ongoing enthusiasm and really hanging in there. So you can find a lot more on her work and her activism, and then also her way of then showing these things in a way that can touch us, that can reach us, and finding the right words for it, something that is almost comforting. So you're talking about public smog. It means like, oh God, this terrible thing of smog. It's actually a public issue, so we're all in it. That helps dealing with it. And I think that sometimes is being forgotten in these conversations in politics, where there's always just this thing regulating, controlling. You have to sign this and that agreement, and otherwise, and so it's always this. There's a lot of negativity in there. The way Amy Balkin works is, she makes it a public thing, a topic that is for all of us, and she doesn't push anyone. She just says, "Look, don't you want to think about this?" It could be something that would be very good to where you are living, so it becomes more human, more smooth, and more agreeable. And I think there's a lot to be said about that, especially at this point in time. I also want to point out then what I said about these 3 biennials in Taipei. First, it's still about negotiating. Then the next one is already, it's like, come on, here, we need to have this ecosystem and show stuff. Great. And then it's like, hey, you and I don't live on the same planet. And it seems that sometimes these things are necessary, that you're saying, you know what, you and I don't live on the same planet. It's like we have a disagreement here. But how can one do this visually? How can one, integrate something like that into a design process? And as Elena is just putting it also into the chat, I wonder, do you have anything that we could look at? Be really great. Or any one of you, not only you, Catherine. Sorry.
I think, I kind of put together a collection of works that your references reminded me of, or things that I made connections to. I didn't necessarily create my own. I guess I was interested in kind of the idea of like, or what you had mentioned, like how do we visualize it? How can we bring things to the forefront, or things that were implied? How can we, foreground something that otherwise would have been in the background? But I think other than kind of these high heels, some of the things that the prompts and your writing started bring to mind to me was aspects of ecofuturism that I think a couple of you guys who were in my history theory class last semester, we talked about, and the ways that it kind of ties into the environment and the way that we're interacting with it. I mean, I can kind of show the references that I
please
brought up. Oh, it's gonna kill me because it's still on Miro. Hopefully this is the right one. But let's see. Immediately I started thinking about, Donna Haraway's writing with the Cthulhu scene, and, the way, I guess something that you had mentioned at the beginning of the lecture was, and throughout, like, changing our perspectives and reorienting ourselves and, changing the scales in the ways that can reorient our perspectives. But kind of that writing, I think, ties into that idea a lot. I don't want to go into it too much because I feel like I don't want to beat that to death. But I don't know, screw it. The best one I think that I want to show just visually that this reminds me of is, let's see, bringing up the mold or the slime and fungus maps and how people are kind of learning from those and creating highways and or connections between that. And all of this is kind of just throwing things at a border, the things that it reminded me of. But looking at the environment and, yeah.
Cool, I don't know this. Yeah, great. But look, I think it's great. Isn't this exciting? I mean, it's like, who says that the environment is a drab thing? I think it's exciting to look at these things, at all these possibilities. And yeah, I think we are just so lucky that we're living in the times we're living in, because we can find stuff like that. People are developing incredibly creative approaches to actually new materials and so on. And that is amazing. Just the other day, I heard about carbon-enforced concrete, which would be so much better for the environment, because carbon is environmentally much less harmful than steel. Yeah, and it's also much lighter, so you need a lot less concrete and so on. And people are everywhere working on these things. And for us as architects to have the chance to look at all these new developments is really beautiful. I'm also really glad that you are looking into Donna Haraway, because she has an extremely direct and surprising way of talking about things. And I think that's very helpful when we talk about environmental issues. Yeah? And we need to find a new language. And that's really beautiful.
In a way, for me, it almost kind of, and maybe this is a stretch, it ties back to kind of the discussion about, interior versus exterior and how those might not necessarily be as separate as we once thought they were, or the way we might be redefining those things. And there's definitely some overlap there for me in that writing, or in that's why I don't know, I'm kind of all over the place today, but the example you showed that had the ground was kind of covered in the inside of that, like I've never seen that reference before, and so I like.
You mean the green water? You mean
yes.
The green water? Yeah. Well, it's a pretty new one.
Anyway, so all of that, I guess, I'm just spinning webs from.
That thing is pretty punk, isn't it? I mean, I think really beautiful, and it's actually, yeah, it's water. I think it's the development of a project that Olaf Oliason did a long, long time ago, somewhere in Scandinavia. I don't remember where exactly, where he put green pigment into sewage in a city, and then he wanted to understand, what sewage is leading into the rivers and stuff like that. So all of a sudden, it was just green pigment, yeah. So all of a sudden, every water in that city was bright green, just like what we are seeing here in this installation, yeah. So it was proving that the sewage was going just into the rivers and then into the sea, yeah. And so, it's just plain simple, yeah. There's nothing more to it. It's just the proof is out there, yeah. And then, he's been working with this green pigment for a long time, but this time, this is the green of a bacteria. And this is why this bacteria also needs this blue light. And, so it's a totally biological process, no pigment involved. When you look at Olaf Elias's website, and they're very funny stories of what they are working on. It's remarkable, yeah, because they're really managing to visualize the atmosphere and things that are happening, things that we humans are doing, and the way the environment is reacting to what we are doing. It's beautiful.
Thank you, Catherine and Karen. And I think we probably have about 5 minutes. I was thinking to ask if to hear from maybe one or two more students, if you would like to jump in if you haven't spoken yet.
Hi, Karen. So just want to hear some feedbacks from some researchers and some things that I've been some interest me. So I've been searching. Let me just share my screen here. So I've been interested in the sounds, all kinds of different sounds, ambient and noises, and I've been looking at Bernhard Leitner, and then his works of the exploration of the sounds and how sounds are affected in a space or affecting people who are in the space. That's one reference, and then a couple of his drawings and experimentation about how sounds that are circulating through let's say this linear pipe device, or more of a six walled room, and then another reference Pianis Exinicis. So I think number 2, this is a device that it was constructed and then took place in a historical site in Iran, and that's also ties to the environment, and then being interested in these sound installation, how they're affecting, and then could relate to the environment. But I guess my main problem is that, well, I think I have this mindset that the thesis, the exploration, the exploration, let's say, with the sound and stuff, it is only a tool. I'm in the process of trying to find a problem, a problem that could be anywhere in the world. I think that's is I think how do you really tie this to a specific problem?
Yeah, I think that, I'm really glad you're mentioning this, and I tell you right away, I'm super interested in sound, but I think atmospherically, it's the one that is maybe the most challenging, at least to me, because it's again one of these things that we cannot see, we can hear it, yeah, and we are so on this visual thing. So it's beautiful to see what you found, also how sound has been visualized or documented or something. First of all, let me let me share one link so I don't forget it, which is Carsten Nicolai, who's a sound artist, and he's also located in Berlin. And I met him a long, long time ago when he just sort of started his career, and he's been really interesting. He's also a DJ, of course, and so on. He's been working a lot with sound and with also translating sound into form and visualization. But he's really especially into how to manipulate sound. Yeah, so how you do sound waves and so he's on the one hand developing sculptures and installations, and then on the other hand he also composes. The funny thing is that he's actually got a background as a landscape designer. Yeah, this is how he started. But anyway, so coming back to your question, I think the urgency of sound is absolutely given. Yeah, so I think you have a big topic here. Sound pollution is something that we are not really talking about yet. The white noise, yeah, which is on the one hand because of machines and stuff like that. There are regulations how loud your vacuum cleaner and your fridge and your something and so on should be. That's peanuts compared to what you're actually getting from the outside, often, yeah, from traffic, from airports, yeah, airplanes. Here in LA, I mean, I don't know where you live, but I live definitely in a trajectory of helicopters, police helicopters. They freak me out. I yell at them because they are flying so close over my house. And I'm just like, you know, at night, sometimes they're circling and all of that, you know, how dare they? It's such a real disturbance. And it is actually also really unhealthy. So it's something that has not yet been so much looked at. And it's because we are, as I said, very focused on the visual. Yeah, so we might be much more looking at visual disturbances than sound disturbances. But there are a lot of people who have hearing problems because of noises, and especially because of these noises that we are not aware of because they are constant. Yeah, so. I think it's a great task, and there are materials, as I'm sure you know and aware of, that are balancing sounds or absorbing sounds, which is very interesting. There's a lot of new science around that. And then, as you might know, most likely from concert halls, you know, it's like just here, Gary's building in downtown has been, you know, a great example of very, very good sound. Another example is, of course, always Hans Scharoun's concert hall in Berlin from the 50s, which has been referenced many, many times, and the Sydney Opera House, and so on. So I don't know whether that exactly answers your question, because those are very architectural examples. But I think what you are showing here also, Yanis Xenakis, of course, is really, it's inspiring. And it's maybe hinting at an architecture that is not built with the usual material, but that is more like an aura or a sphere or something like that, and that can be very beautiful to make soundscapes, to look into things like that, and how material is also reacting to it.
More like a non-visual approach, or
I don't know exactly, but I would almost think that this very lightweight material that Thomas Saracino was working with in this very colorful dome, yeah, that is working with temperature. There are some materials that are responding to sound, and that's why I think you should look at Carsten Nicolai's work, because I know he's been working with liquids and fabrics and things like that that respond to sound. Yeah. And because there is something, it's like, when you have really deep sounds like beats or something, that does something to us, to our body, right? So I'm pretty sure it does something to other things as well. Plants react to sound. Yeah, vibrations, exactly. Yeah, and I think that could be a great entrance into the project.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tianzi, thank you for sharing, and also to Catherine for sharing your work, some of your research. And Karen, this has been an amazing morning, wonderful workshop for all the students, and really opens things up rather than closes things down. We want to thank you for spending some time with us and for being so generous with all of the questions, and always the kind of thinking of more and more references, more and more readings and exhibitions to look at. I think this will really inspire the students to look deeper and to kind of look a little bit more carefully and more closely and pay attention to the environments more than we have before, right? To kind of pay attention to the very everyday things. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I really enjoyed it, and I think it's so important that we do this. And it's, as said, maybe the big closing remark, it's like, it's so nice to work with things that we don't know yet, because that is a really great challenge. And there are people, I think what scientists are doing, this constant searching for something new to find solutions, is so amazing. And I wish for us in architecture and in urbanism to do that too, to not work with what we already know, but to go on that search thing. Yeah, because that is where it becomes interesting. Yeah, to test things and see how far we can go, and get reactions. And I'd really like to encourage you all to do that. And it's also what we do at SCI-Arc, right?
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Anna, for the beautiful morning altogether. I think we have to all drive to SCI-Arc, so I'm gonna let's wrap it up, because I think the students need to drive to SCI-Arc, and so the faculty, and so myself as well. So we'll see all of you guys at 2 in your studios. Thank you all.
Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Karen.